How was that? Thank you, John. Good morning. Welcome to the March meeting of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'm Harold Cannon. I'll be chairing today's meeting. If you would, join Commissioner Cox. He's going to lead us in our invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner.
Let's pray. Lord, we pause today to thank you for our many blessings, for this wonderful country and this state, the fine men and women of this agency. We ask you to bless our servicemen wherever they may be, servicemen and women. We ask you to bless the commission with wisdom, and that all of our thoughts and actions and words be pleasing to you. And we ask these in our Savior Jesus' name. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Commissioner Cox, thank you. Intentionally asked him to do it with the thunder outside. I figure that he is one that could for sure get through the thunder and voice there. So, Ms. Hayes, would you mind calling the roll, please, ma'am?
Chad Baker. Jim Bledsoe.
Here.
Harold Cannon.
Here.
Jeff Cook.
Here.
Bill Cox.
Here.
Kurt Holbert.
Here.
Connie King. Here. Jeff McMillan. Jim Ripley.
Here.
Bill Swan. Trey Teague.
Here.
David Watson.
Here.
Jamie Woodson. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Commissioners, you were provided a draft copy of the minutes from the February meeting. Are there any corrections to those minutes? I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you so much. Well, to everyone, good morning. This is obviously an abbreviated session of the commission. Today we're going to be covering both the committee agendas as well as any proclamations or action that the commission as a whole needs to take. In advance, I appreciate your patience because I'm probably going to mess up something today, but we sure are glad that everyone is here. Let me lay out some kind of quick ground rules. We're going to do this a few times for this coming year, and that is contrary to what appears to be the rules of debate and town hall meetings that we have. Everyone who has preceded me, Commissioner Cox, Commissioner Bledsoe, Jeff McMillan, Jeff Griggs, everyone has done a remarkable job of conducting these meetings where everyone is treated with respect and that there is civility. We're about a subject that's very passionate to a lot of folks, near and dear to us, including us. And it's good to have healthy debate. But we will have debate in a way that is respectful and is civil to all concerned. And that's what I'll be asking of folks. There aren't many public folks here, but in the future, that's the way we will conduct business. We will not make any personal accusations. There will not be a personal agenda. There's only one agenda up at this stage here, and that is that we're doing our best to care for the resources that we've been asked to steward for this state and to care for those folks who help care for it, and that includes the hunting and fishing community of this state. And we need that help. And so that's the way we want to conduct our business here. The first step to that is what Commissioner Bledsoe did so well, and it's probably my phone that's beeping, so let's all take a look at our phone and make sure that we got these son of a guns turned off, either on silent or whatever is best for you. And if you do need to take a call, please step outside. I don't think you'll miss much if you do have to take a call out there, but we just ask that you not have any phone calls in the process of this meeting. There'll be questions throughout the day. Maybe not that many today, but in the future, definitely a lot. And Commissioner Bledsoe set the mark correctly in his chairmanship, and that is that we need to direct the questions to either the chair of the committee that is in charge at that time or to the chair here. This is not an opportunity to have direct dialogue with our staff. Again, we're trying to keep this civil and organized, and we've found over time that's the best way to conduct business. I think we have some guests here today, and let me recognize Mr. Boyd Barker. Thank you so much. You are consistently here with us, and it reflects the partnership that we have with you all. So thank you so much. Ron Crabtree, thank you again. Somebody needs to wake up Mr. Mike Butler, and that is not a gig at him. He has spent a lot of hours on the Hill on behalf of the sportsmen and women across this state. He's doing a heck of a job partnering with us as well. My notion is Julie Schuster is at home getting some much-needed rest. We want to thank her and the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Foundation for partnering with Representative Lawler last night. Had a remarkable sportsman's caucus that we were invited to attend, and I can't have enough praises for that time. And we equally appreciate the legislators that turned out for that event. Our agency staff, Frank, the folks that surrounded you, all the cooking that you did last night, and people are saying, that's carp. It was a remarkable meal, and you were right. The Asian carp was tremendous, and I know you all spent a lot of hours and cooked a lot of pounds of fish, and you were behind the scenes, and not many people thanked you for that. So let me say it publicly. Thank you, and thanks to each and every one of the folks that surrounded you and helped you last night. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. Director Carter, is there anything you would like to go over at the front end of the meeting? If not, why don't we dive into the agenda? And have I left out anything so far? Thank you, okay. I had a shock. There's a shock collar under here, and she's charged with hitting the button if I screw up, so that's Chair will recognize Trey Teague, who heads up our Wildlife Management Committee. Chairman Teague, it's all yours.
Good morning, folks. Can we have the lights? Thank you. It's good to be here this morning. It's an unusual time of year to see me here and talk about waterfowl seasons. Typically, that's done in the fall. So what we have for you today is a preview of next fall, this coming fall's waterfowl seasons. And here's the agenda for this talk. The first thing is I'm going to tell you why I'm up here at this time of year and really remind you of that. We've talked about it a couple times here, but it's kind of a confusing thing. So we'll go over that again. We've got draft proclamations for you. Again, as a preview, we'll be asking you to take action on those next meeting. We'll talk about the preliminary sandhill crane harvest from last year, the crane drawing date for this coming fall, and then also, again, just try to get in all of our minds the timing of the waterfowl and all migratory bird season proclamations for next year. We're on a new process here. So you've seen this slide before. I think I've shown it maybe twice before. The top part there, 2015-16 season, which we just finished up, the federal process involved two kind of separate processes. We have the early seasons and then the late seasons. The early seasons include dove, woodcock, snipe, crow, and September waterfowl season, and those are called the early seasons. They're done before the late seasons, which are duck and goose seasons. Typically, in the old federal process, we use spring breeding populations, or BPOPs. We looked at those during our summer flyway meeting, and then we set the current hunting year season. In other words, we'd have a flyway meeting in July. We'd be setting seasons for September, October, November, December, January of the same year. So you folks you realize that our waterfowl hunting guides, our dove hunting guides, they all came out just before the season opened. And because of this and some other factors, the federal government wanted to allow for more public comment, a longer period of time. There's a greater and greater administrative burden that they have to do as far as publishing their preliminary and their final federal registers. And so this next year, the 2016-17 migratory bird seasons, They're combined into one, so we no longer have an early and late season process. We just have a migratory game bird process. And if you look at the bottom three bullets there, we're using the spring 2015 breeding population, which is the same data that we used to set last hunting season. We used it at this fall's hunting meeting, so we had a meeting in September, and we're setting the seasons for next year. So we're about a year ahead of time, okay? Essentially, the easy way to say that is we're using last year's data to set this year's seasons. Canada's been doing this for a number of years. There's some emergency stopgaps in there if there's some crazy bad thing that happens with waterfowl populations. But we know from history that, you know, canvasbacks are usually the same from year to year, pintails, those kind of things. So they've done some simulations at the Fish and Wildlife Service level modeling, and they're pretty confident that this change in process using sort of last year's data or this year's data to set next year's season is not going to result in very much of a change for hunters. So for 2016-17, this coming fall, we'll essentially reuse our 2015 breeding population data for waterfowl, geese, all the other birds, doves. You'll recall that it was 49.5 million ducks, which is again a record high. And so there's no changes to the federal frameworks for this hunting season, which makes sense because we used this data last year. It ought to be the same for this year. So to keep things simple, I'm going to refer to these, and you have in your booklet the late season waterfowl proclamation. I'll talk about what we're going to do for next year to kind of simplify this and remove this late and early season kind of language. So again, the federal frameworks call for a liberal package, which is a 60-day season, 6 duck bag limit. There's no changes. We are proposing those 2 bullets in yellow, 2 changes to this, what used to be the late waterfowl season proclamation. We want to move the rail season, the Virginia and soar rail season, Gallinule and moorhen seasons a little bit earlier. They're typically concurrent with the late waterfowl season, the regular duck season. These are not cold hardy birds, and so they're usually out of here by then. And so a lot of other states have these seasons earlier in September and October. And so this came in as a public request, and it really matches up with the migration chronology of these species. So we're making that request or that suggestion at this meeting. We also want to modify the Brant season, and really it's to align with other goose seasons. The Mississippi flyway has not harvested a Brant in over 5 years. And I didn't look up any longer than that, but no one's killed a Brant. They're coastal species. We've got Atlantic Brant, Pacific Brant. They're typically coastal species. One will wander in occasionally, but we've not killed one in a long time. The Brant season now is contiguous. It's a 70-day season, and our waterfowl season is 60 days. So there's a chunk of time in our regulations where you can go Brant hunting, and there's nothing else open. And so it's kind of a conflict with law enforcement, but really, my thought was that we don't want to set an empty plate at the table for hunters. In other words, if somebody that doesn't know much about Brant or they just moved to Tennessee, they'll look and say, oh, I can go Brant hunting on some random day when there's nothing else open. And there's really, the chance of them encountering a Brant is very slim. So we have a modification of Brant season that we want to suggest. Again, just wanted to show you the daily duck bag limit from last year. There's no change. And so this is the proclamation. You have this red line in your packet if you want to follow along. Again, the red line items here are mostly simply date changes to correct for this year's calendar. I did add an asterisk here up in the top right, if you can see the mouse hovering. Season closes. The youth waterfowl seasons, as we all know, if you read down here, the 2 Saturdays immediately following the close of regular duck season. And so the way this table reads, we're going to change it for the final proclamation next month, but it opens on the 4th of February, it closes on the 4th of February, which is kind of confusing. Not that many people read the proclamation, but I added an asterisk in here that says all seasons close at the end of legal shooting hours on the date listed. So essentially, we want to make sure that folks know they can hunt all day. So that's this part here, duck, coots, and merganser season. Just continuing down on the proclamation, this is our suggested change for purple gallinules, common moorhens, Virginia rails, and soar rails. So you have items C and D here, and essentially the change will be the same for both of them. So I'll just go over the top, purple gallinules and common moorhens. We're suggesting that the season open September 1st each year, in other words, a fixed date, very similar to dove season, and closing November 9th, which is the end of the maximum framework allowed. And so our suggestion is that we have that every year, year in and year out. I've combined the reelfoot duck zone and the remainder of the state because they'll have the same dates there. And the same thing for Virginia and Sword Rails. We're suggesting the same dates and combining those two duck zones. Again, because the migration chronology of these birds puts them in Tennessee during that time period. And we also have Canada goose seasons in September, and we have our wood duck teal season and our experimental teal season. So there'll be hunters out there encountering these species during normal hunting seasons as well. Okay, just continuing down further on the red line proclamation, again, just date changes for white-fronted geese, the light geese, and the light goose conservation season. Just date corrections for the calendar. Here's where the Brant at the very bottom there, item G. The Brant season historically had been just a long season. The correction here, or the suggestion is to close it essentially from November 28th through December 2nd. And again, there's no other waterfowl season open then, but we don't have Brant here to really go out and pursue intentionally. So the idea would be, Brant look very similar to Canada geese. They're black and white. And about the same size, and so we want to be able to we want to allow folks to harvest them if they encounter them, but we really don't think they're going to see them there. So it'll simplify the regulations and allow them to harvest Brant when they're out there for other waterfowl species. Canada goose season, again, just date corrections, both in the northwest and the statewide goose zones. And then the sandhill crane season. We're recommending no change this year. I've got a few slides here after that. I think probably everyone on the commission saw the email exchange about why we're not in an operational crane season this year. I'll have a few slides on that. Again, these are the suggested dates, similar to last year, just corrected for the calendar. Okay, kind of as a preview, just wanted to share what Kentucky did. They're about a year ahead of us in their crane season. They requested a fourth crane season, not as an operational season, but kind of an interim season, under the experimental criteria that were outlined in the Federal Register. They really wanted to take some time and analyze their data and prepare a report. So they actually had a fourth season, like we're requesting here, prepared their final report, and they had their first operational season this past year. So they're in an operational season now. No hiccups at all. It just kind of went right through. One thing that's very different, as I explained in the email earlier this week, is the federal regulation process changed. This two-phase process to a one-phase process. It happened at the very worst time for us in our crane season, because let me just skip down here to this bullet under Tennessee. We would have had to request an operational season before we actually had the third year of our experiment. So when we set up the experiment, we said we want to have a 3-year experimental season, and here's the data, here's the hunting season, here's the outline of the criteria that we want to use. And after we do the 3 years, if the hunter behavior and activity and harvest fall within this, we'll go operational. And so what happened was, with this change in federal process, we would have had to ask for this season before. As for the operational season, before we completed the experiment. I felt that was a little bit unfair. And so you'll see this bullet here, or this note unofficially, 2 different times at a flyway meeting, once in the July meeting and then also at this sort of new September meeting that we had this year. I basically asked the Fish and Wildlife Service, Jim Kelly, the flyway rep, I said, look, you guys have changed the process in the middle of the game here. And, we should be able to follow our schedule. I didn't get really much support from them. People in the other states said, yeah, that doesn't seem right. And that was about all we got. So there's no official record of us asking for this. There are notes in the minutes that I mentioned this. But again, looking back at what Kentucky did, it was just one of those things where we weren't sure if the sweat was worth it. So we recommended, or we requested at the September meeting officially a 4th year of the crane season, just like Kentucky did under the experimental criteria, and we were granted that. So there's a lot of things that we're going to, options that we have to change in the operational season, going statewide, some things like that. I've got a slide, a couple down here. But again, the idea is for this year that we'll just retain the experimental criteria, similar to the season that we had last year, and then next year we'll make those changes. I don't foresee any problem with us getting an operational season. We've fallen within the guidelines. Kentucky has received their operational season. There's really no hiccups. It's kind of a matter of timing and paperwork. So it was just an unfortunate change. We'll also have this same situation with our experimental teal days. We'll have to have that 4th year of a season, provided we pass the experiment, before we can go operational. That won't make as much of a difference as this, but again, just kind of we're changing the process. The feds have changed the process, and all of our experiments have to kind of begin to fall in line with that. So I wanted to share with you the population counts that we have for cranes this year. The fall eastern population count, which is kind of the big count, I guess, if you will, for cranes, last October was almost 95,000. So again, this population has continued to grow. In 1979, when this population was first surveyed, the count was 14,000. So we're, more than 6 times that population already. In Tennessee, as you know, we had a very mild winter. Cranes were not down. There's a lot of folks that got permits that didn't hunt until the very end of the season when we got that cold snap right around Christmas. So this count is done the first week of January. Our population count this year of these birds in Tennessee was about 16,000. So you compare that with 42 from last year, 25, 18, and 13 from 2012 and 15. So our numbers are down a little bit, to be expected when we have a mild winter like this. So the 3-year eastern population sandhill crane average is 80,890. And these are the numbers that go into the calculation for when we ask for an operational season. The 5-year Tennessee average is 23,193. So when I go to the flyway meeting this fall and make the request for the operational season, these are the numbers we'll use. I'll double check them again, but essentially we can ask for up to 10% of the 5-year crane average in Tennessee. So that number will be 2,319 permits. That's the most we can ask for, and that will be our request to the service. And of course, the experimental criteria will sort of go away, and we can ask for whatever we want, really. And so we'll ask for a statewide harvest at that point.
The 2,319 permits, is that 3 birds per permit?
I think when we go operational, we don't have to ask, we don't have to tell the feds what we want. So we could do 3, we could do 2, we could do 1, we could do something different, I think. I'll have to check the EP crane plan to make sure, but we won't be constrained nearly as we are under the experimental criteria. So we could certainly continue with 3. My intention, typically how we do this, and actually the way Kentucky did this, they asked for, like we will, the maximum number of permits. Kentucky has not changed any of their hunting plan when they move from experimental to operational. They take fewer permits, they allow fewer hunters, and they actually close their season before all the hunters kill their birds. They only kill 85, 90, maybe 100 birds there. But I think they permit something like 400 birds, and when they get to 200, they close their season. They're going to close their season. They have, their cranes are different. They have less agricultural area. Most of the cranes are on federal or state refuges. So there's limited hunting, there's limited access to these birds, but they're conservative with their estimation. So when we go, what I want to do for Tennessee is ask for the most and provide as few details. In other words, I don't want to tie ourselves to 3 birds per permit if we don't have to. Obviously, we'll follow whatever federal criteria we need to, but if I can just say we want to have this many permits, here's our calculation, and allow this harvest statewide, well, then you folks can do whatever we want within those guidelines. I want us to have the most flexibility in Tennessee to create our own season as we can. There's another thing in our current plan about hunting till 3 p.m. There's discussion about hunting birds on their roost and those kind of things. I'm not sure that we need to put that in our request to the federal government. We can continue that if we want to. We can change that. We can make it more restrictive, or we can liberalize that. I'd just rather not tell the feds something that we're going to do that we don't have to tell them. So, was that too confusing for you? I apologize if it was. Okay.
Would the dates of the hunt, for the far as the feds are concerned, would be the same as duck season, same as the other waterfowl season? We could do what we wanted to with it? Yes,
sir. I believe the hunt plan now says we can have 58 days, and again, the hunt plan is kind of the maximum we can have. What our request would be for 60 days for this operational season. So that would be something I think that's in the EP hunt plan, that we can ask for 60 days, right? One thing, and again, we're getting down in the weeds, but unlike a waterfowl season where you have 60 days and you can have a split, if you have a split in a crane season, you have to eat those days. So in other words, we can't split our days and keep 60. It's a little confusing, but if you want to split in Tennessee, you're going to have to eat those days. There'll be a 60-day framework, and you can pick all 60 days or something less than that, which essentially would create a split. So we'll talk more about that as we begin to develop the operational season. Any other questions? That was fairly detailed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the terms of art that you're using. You're using experimental season and operational season. My understanding is that we are at the final year of the experimental season. I thought that was last year, and I was confused. But, so, that's right. And so I was under the impression last year that by this season, we would be in a position to move from an experimental season to what I think you're calling the operational season, which is we are now not limited by a limited land area. We can ultimately begin having a thoughtful conversation without the bars of federal policy to what is the resource, what can it take, what are the right policies, but there would be no prohibition for us having a full statewide policy. What I think I'm hearing you say when you use the term of art operational season is that that's really a conversation that now to provide us maximum flexibility will be this fall for potentially next year's season, but there is nothing, if we tend to our business properly in 2016, that would prohibit us at the next opportunity from having a full conversation about maximum flexibility, what's the resource need, and a Tennessee-based conversation with all of the input from other resources, but we won't be limited by federal policy at that point. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, ma'am. We will be limited by the policy of that's in the EP Crane
Right.
hunt plan, but that's all.
Right, but we will be potentially able to consider full statewide season,
Yes, ma'am.
the full 2061. No, that's your hours in the field. What's your number? What was that number? 2319 permits. To the extent that our parameters, that will be the maximum extent of our parameters, but that will be the conversation that we can have at that time. Is that right?
Ma'am.
Got it. And will you just remind me why we're having to wait the extra year? Because I may have misunderstood. I thought, and just so nobody's getting nervous, I'm not suggesting a different strategy. I'm hearing him. But what happened? Because I thought this year was the year we could have that conversation. What did I misunderstand?
I'm going to go back to a slide that I showed earlier. It has to do with the change in timing of the federal process.
Okay.
So we've completed, at this point today, and typically, this year in July, when I would have normally come and presented this information, or August, we would have completed that. We would have asked for an operational season in February. The issue is, if you look at the bottom, the very bottom bullet there, to set the 16-17 seasons, we did that in the fall of 2015 now under the new process. When that happened, it was September of 2015. We'd only completed 2 years of our experiment.
Got it.
So we've completed 3 years now, but at the time of the meeting and the time that the request was made, and I made the request unofficially,
Right.
I said, look, this doesn't seem fair. And they said, well, okay, it's not fair.